Our questions are really thinking about how did a culture change when it was taken from its homeland, brought over on the Middle Passage, and transplanted to plantations like the Wye House.
Our job was to find what African Americans and Africans left behind.
The descendants of the enslaved labor who still live in Easton, Unionville, Copperville, the surrounding towns, they were very interested in the daily lives of enslaved people. What was left from Africa? What did people bring with them?
What were their ancestors doing in a place like this? And how can we look at them in a different light, a very human light?
It's a national story about how these cultures came together under an oppressive system of slavery and how that transformed into a story of freedom. Those are really the questions that have driven us the entire time that we've been excavating at Wye House. Everybody leaves traces.
Different things are going on to create differences in the soil. And as archaeologists, when those things are cultural, that's what we're interested in.
There were 2 Native American projectile points and a brass button. Those were laid in a row underneath the doorway, pointing outward.
We have what looks to be a cache, a collection of objects with spiritual purposes.
If you are being forced as an enslaved worker to live here, you're going to want some kind of barrier between the world of the dead and the world of the living.
They deliberately put them there within this worldview of these larger practices that weren't dictated to them, but created and actively maintained.
There's a single American cuisine here, put together in the kitchen by the Lloyd women and African American cooks working together, all recorded in 2 great cookbooks from the 19th century.
This was very much a practice of women. They passed these traditions on about how to cook, what to use, what kinds of spices, how best to serve it.
It is an exploitation of the local environment, both the domesticated environment and the wild environment, caught, harvested, grown by the enslaved.
This would have been a very joint effort between African American cooks and European American cooks.
The Lloyds are eating the same food, but not the same cuts as the enslaved. Vegetables, spices, lots of desserts, lots of sugar, but it is what you would see in downtown Easton today, or in Atlanta for that matter, as Southern cooking.
This is burdock. It's also called bur vine. From slave narratives, we know that people would have picked this, cultivated this, used it for a variety of illnesses. It could have been brewed as a tea to cure a variety of ailments. And it's growing right outside of a slave quarter where it would be easily accessible.
There's also a common pharmacopoeia here, an apothecary that comes from the woods, that comes from the bogs, and it's all recorded through the pollen remains of this place.
You see purposeful cultivation within the greenhouse by the Lloyd family of plants that can be used for medicinal purposes.
Who would have grown and cultivated that? Well, the Scots gardener, but also would have been used by the African people who lived in, maintained, cared for, watered, made sure there was no freezing in the greenhouse.
The people who worked here and lived here, the enslaved labor, they would have needed to have all of this knowledge. They would have needed to have the skills and the abilities to keep these plants alive.
Because we analyzed the bones from food remains, and because we analyzed the fossil pollen in the greenhouse, and we looked at the slave censuses, which the Lloyds kept on their own separate from the federal censuses, and because we paid a great deal of attention to how Africans and African Americans worshipped, what we concluded was that while there may be 2 colors here and 2 races, there's a single joint heritage or a single culture.